a world-class entrepreneur here. Eugenio Pace actually took a very untraditional route. He actually spent about 20 years working in big tech before actually starting his startup. He broke all the rules. He started remote first. His co-founder was in another country when he was starting Auth0. And they ended up exiting for $6.5 billion to Auth0. So just an incredible story. And we're super lucky to have him here today. So Eugenio, with that, you broke all the rules, but you still made it work.
Yes.
When you look back on your journey, what allowed you to have that level of success despite taking such an untraditional path?
Well, there's luck too. So timing and luck have something to. It's a big component in what we call success. What I did it at a time where, if I had started 5 years earlier, it probably wouldn't happen.
And could you tell everybody here what was that led you to? I mean, most people who have worked 20 years at Microsoft, they're most likely going to keep working at Microsoft or go work in another big corporation. So what was the unique insight, or what was it that compelled you so much that you saw such a big opportunity that you wanted to quit? Because you were also the breadwinner in your family, and so it was a big risk for you to take as well.
Yeah, so I started my first company right after college. And this was, many, like 30 plus years ago. Different place, different country, different environment. It didn't work very well for me, but I always wanted to build something. So I guess the itch to create something from scratch was always there. That initial, let's call it failure, led me to work in banks, and then eventually to Microsoft, where I spent 13 years at. First in South America, where I'm from, and then I moved here 20 years ago. So I moved to the US and joined Microsoft Corp there. I think I would credit Microsoft for a lot of the success, a lot of the things that went well out of zero. Because I learned, one of the advantages of starting a company late. Sorry.
The battery died.
Oh, okay. One of the advantages of starting a company when you're older, like me, is that you have some, gray hair and some experience, and you don't necessarily make some mistakes. And so I created a lot Microsoft for many things that I applied later. But in addition to the desire to build something from scratch and creating a company, it was really serendipity, because in 2009 we were working. I was working in a team that was looking at all the things that could stand in the way of developers building applications in the cloud. And I was in the Visual Studio team, so it was developers was our thing. And I found that identity and access management was one of those big problems. And we ended up publishing a little book about it. 2009 was this size, it was never a bestseller in the true sense, but it was pretty popular at Microsoft. And then in 2011, we wrote the second edition of the same book, which was this size. And so that was a little bit of our insight into this problem is not going away, it's becoming bigger, it's universal, everybody's going to encounter this. And then what happened is the true expert in the domain, a very good friend of mine, he referred me to a job inside Microsoft to essentially build Auth0. And guess what happened? I didn't get the job. So despite writing 2 books about it and spending years, quite a few years in the domain and talking to tons of people and customers, and knowing the problem inside out, they still told me that I wasn't the guy to do it. They were probably right, because doing that in the context of Microsoft was very different. But of course, they gave me an incredible gift, which is the gift of saying, well,
screw it. Let's do it.
Go on and do it. And my wife, who deserves the credit for a lot of things that are what I've done in the which are visible, she told me, if you believe in these things so much, why do you need somebody else to do it with you? Why don't you just go and do it? And if you're so certain that it's a big problem and there's a big business around it. And she was right. And so she said, what's the worst that could happen? You try and then it doesn't work, which is most likely what's going to happen. And then you go back to Microsoft or somewhere else, you know. And so she gave me 1 year. She wrote a little contract for me, which I kept next to me for 1 year. And that was another blessing because I had a deadline. I had some certain conditions to meet and kept me focused. And so I gathered a little bit of courage, and in December of 2012, I resigned and I started the company with my friends in Argentina.
And what was that road to getting your first customer like?
Well, you know, that time there were these chat, you know, icons on the website. And now it's all automated and it's all AI, which is great. At that time, it was me behind the scenes. And so everybody who showed up on the website asking questions, I would be there. And I was there 24/7, every day, Saturday, Sunday. And I knew quite a bit about the problem. So I was very well trained in the problem. So I provided really, really good answers. No hallucinations most of the time. And my first customer was somebody who showed up on the chat on our website. And he was building another website, and he needed authentication. So we did a little bit of, you know, asynchronous consultation. But then I said, look, you know, it's going to be easier if I show you how to do it. And so we did a Skype session. That time there was no Zoom or any of those, and I spent like 2 hours, you know, setting everything up for him and helping him with all his questions. And 2 hours later, he was up and running and had all the requirements of advanced authentication with multi-factor and all social logins, etc. Everything was working. And then he asked me, he was really happy. And he said, well, I want to pay you for this. How much is it? A question I didn't have an answer for. Because I didn't think that anybody was going to buy it, you know, so soon. So I said, well, it's $50 a month. Because 50 sounded like a good number. No science behind it. And we negotiated a little bit, and he offered me $27 a month. And I said, yeah, sure, why not? We didn't even have Stripe wired on the website, so I called the rest of the team. At that time, we already had a small team. And I said, well, we have our first customer, he wants to pay. We need a way to charge. And so we wired up Stripe, and the next day he was putting his credit card there. We got our first paying customer. I was so happy that I could cross one of my wife's contract requirements, which was paying customers, that I was celebrating in my home office. And so she came and asked me, what do you think she asked me?
How much?
Well, what happened? First she asked me, what happened? I say, well, see, clause number 2 on your contract, paying customers, I did it. And then she asked me, how much? And I said, $27 a month. And what do you think she said?
How many of those are you going to need?
You're going to need a lot of those. She was right. But, you know, eventually we got a few months later, I got connected, you know, I took every call, I answered all the emails, I answered all the chats. I spent a lot of time on the phone with prospects, and eventually I found a larger customer. So this became like the second data point in our hypothesis for our markets. We got a developer, somebody working on a startup and a small team, and then we had a big insurance company with hundreds of employees, thousands of employees, and the same need, the same concern, the same problem. And that became our second data point. So developers in the world, and then a big company.
And since you worked with a co-founder that's in another country, how was it collaborating with them and actually communicating with them? That must have been hard.
Well, I knew my co-founder, I should say, was somebody who applied for a job at Microsoft. Our story started years before. He applied for it. I was in Microsoft Argentina, and he applied for a job in Microsoft Argentina, and I was the interviewer for the position. And naturally, I rejected him. So I said, like, you're not ready for this just yet. He was too young and inexperienced, but he was very impressive. And over time, we stayed in touch. He founded a consulting company that we used a lot for working with customers. When I moved to the US, Microsoft US hired his company to build stuff. And we stay in touch. And so at that time, if I sent one thumbs up or a smiley on chat, that meant probably three paragraphs of explanations. So we had such a deep, intimate relationship that we knew each other very well. So there wasn't a lot of communication required. But of course, we spoke every hour. We used HipChat, a long time ago, before Slack. There was this chat system, it was HipChat. And we used that, we used all the tools that we had available at that time. But I should say, as another blessing from Microsoft, the group I was working on was one of the first. We broke a lot of rules there too. And we broke the rule of publishing open source from Microsoft. This is like decades ago, where there was, Linux was the devil and open source was the enemy. My team was doing open source. We also implemented agile practices, which didn't exist at the time. It was very, much more structured. And we implemented all of that. And also we hired talent all over the world. So we got to practice remote working, in 2005, which was unheard of. And Microsoft was really a cool place. At one point, I'll tell you a funny story. We wanted to mentioned agile software development. And so we booked a conference room so all the team members could all work together. We could do pair programming, other things. Until the facilities team came and said, you cannot book a meeting room for a month. Meeting rooms are for everybody, not just for you. And so, I'm from Argentina, so workarounds. I reserved it on Monday, he reserved it on Tuesday. They figured it out, they came back and said, you cannot do that. You cannot just be squatters in this meeting room. So, why are you doing this? I said, well, because we want to work together. We don't want to have offices. We just want to be all in one place. I'm a program manager, he's a developer, he's a tester, he's a UI specialist. We are all collaborating here. And so eventually they hired an architect to redesign the entire floor we were in. And they built it with no cubicles, no offices, big meeting rooms, projectors everywhere. It was really nice. They spent probably millions of dollars on an experiment with us. But I learned it all there. So when I started Auth0, when we started Auth0, we didn't need to invent a lot of things. We were already doing the things that then became more common.
It sounds like Microsoft was a great training ground for you to
it was a very natural step for you to go on and start Auth0.
Very much so, yeah.
What would you say is the greatest myth about entrepreneurship or building a company?
Well, I don't know, I wouldn't dare to generalize, but as an engineer, my bias, and maybe it's a bias I've seen in others too. I don't know you guys, I don't know any of you, but as an engineer, my biggest bias was that, the product is everything. And I heard you hear these terms like, we are a sales, like a sales-led company or a product-led company or finance-led company. And as an engineer, I mentioned my first company when I left school. I believed that anything outside engineering was like beneath human, almost. Very, 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 very sad mistake. I paid a big price for it. So I thought that the product was everything, that engineering was the most important thing, that the product was all it counted, and that, build it that they will come, the famous last words, perhaps. And, one of the things that I learned at Microsoft too was that building a company is a team exercise. And sure, the product is important, but if nobody knows about your product, it doesn't matter. Nobody knows about it. It's the tree that falls in the forest. Doesn't matter. Doesn't make any noise. You can argue, well, it's the best product. Yeah, sure. You can have a very, pretty shitty product and great go-to-market. Can probably sell a few, but it only goes that far until a customer comes back and says, this doesn't work. So you kind of need whole components of a true company. You need great go-to-market and great product, great engineering, great operations, great finance, great HR people. I learned that the best salespeople are as difficult to find as the greatest engineers in the world. And I learned, that first year where we bootstrapped the company, and I was on the calls and on the chats and talking to customers, I had to sell, and I learned how difficult it was to do that. And I had some experience and exposure. Because, Microsoft, I was in the field, I was in product, I traveled all over the world, I spoke with customers all the time. But a big company, one of the things that happens in big companies is that specialization, it's like almost like something you cannot avoid. And so you end up working in very niche, areas. One of the greatest experiences in a startup is that you get to do everything initially. You get to do sales, you get to do product, marketing, documentation. There was no job beneath me at that time. And that gives you a better appreciation of how hard it is to do all of those things well. There's pretty bad salespeople, there's pretty bad engineers too. And all of that needs to be working as a true team.
And since you guys scaled from like you taking calls one-to-one and to more people globally even, what was one lesson about scaling that you can share with us?
Well, there is somebody said, I forget who did it. Do things that don't scale first, and then figure out the optimization. So I think it's very important it's a very important lesson. And scaling something you haven't really figured out yet, it's the same sin that you commit in software development. Where you start optimizing when it's not required, and probably you spend energy on something that doesn't yield any benefits to you. So you need, scale is this art of changing the paradigm when the paradigm is exhausted. And so, I could not take any more calls because the day has 24 hours. And yes, I used most of the 24 hours, but I also needed to sleep and eat, and there was more calls that we could take. And so that was a time where we had to build, the next stage of the machine. One of the challenges of scale is perhaps the throwing away the paradigms that don't work anymore. Because one thing that happened to us, inevitably you will have people questioning, why are we doing this? Why do we need strategic planning? Strategic planning is something big companies buy from McKinsey's and pay millions of dollars, and we are a 100-people company. Why do you need strategic planning? We have all these myths of things that belong in different buckets. Or we want to move fast. We don't need all these policies or rules. And what takes you to one place doesn't take you to the next place. It's like you're in a boat, you're rowing, and then the lake, there's an end of the lake, and then you see this dirt. If you want to row over dirt, it's pretty damn hard, So it's time to ditch the boat and start walking, and then you need a bicycle or another thing. So in a company, you're always going to encounter these places where people will question, why do we need this? Why do we need to invest in a different paradigm? And it's pretty hard to do, especially because a lot of those people that question those paradigms are the most loyal, the most dedicated, the most committed people that you have in your company. And then you have to tell them, well, no, we cannot do this anymore. And it's it's one of the most difficult conversations that I had to do.
When you think about the journey of building a company, it's like you have to constantly be reinventing yourself, right? As a leader, as the founder, and then even the company, reinventing processes, the way they approach things. What would you say are the most important traits for an entrepreneur to be successful?
Well, I think this is just a disclaimer here for all of you. This is my personal experience, and I don't claim to have any, truth or this worked for me. And I did it only once, or maybe twice. So, yes, it's successful, and it was okay, and I had a failure initially. There's a lot in between. But so take everything I say with a little bit of a grain of salt, because one thing I would say it's important is, somebody mentioned in the previous panel, humility and grit. I think those are very important traits. There is, in ancient Greece, there was this thing carved on a temple or somewhere that said, know yourself. I think that's one of the wisest things that have endured the ages. And for an entrepreneur and a CEO, if you end up in that role specifically, knowing yourself is probably the best strategy you have for yourself. Knowing all the things you don't know. Because unfortunately we have all these role models of what great CEOs are that are all, they're great for Twitter and great for headlines, but no real reflection of my experience what great company leaders and company builders are. And the greatest CEOs are not the ones that know everything. They're not the ones that make all the decisions. They're not the ones that are the most, banging the table all the time, the most hunger-driven individuals. Those are not the greatest models. And so, if you ask me what's the CEO's job, I think the CEO job is not to sit down and code or write the documentation and be on every sales call. I think that even doing all those things, it's valuable. And you probably should do it if you want to do I did it, and it was great for me to know and to have a better understanding of what building a good company was. But it's not because I knew more about documentation than somebody else, or I knew more about code than somebody else, or I knew how to sell better than somebody else. It was to gain the empathy and the understanding of what that job was about. The best CEOs I've seen are those who spend a disproportionate amount of time building a great team. A team that and it's tricky, very tricky, because the team is something that will probably not survive the first years of your existence. The team that created the company V1, it's very unlikely to be the team that will create the second year of that. And as I mentioned before, it's one of the hardest decisions as a CEO is to look at your team and say, these are the greatest people I work with. I'm grateful that they took the company where it is today, but they're not the team that is going to take the company in the next couple of years. And detecting what that happens, it's very difficult. And most of the time I would say ego stands in the way, and so there's three movements. Either you bring somebody else and you layer, you move those individuals to a different role, or they leave the organization. And statistically, in my experience, most of the time, ego prevents them from staying in a different role or working for somebody else, and they leave the company. I did all of them. So I was successful in getting somebody to do a different job, successful in bringing somebody with more experience to now reporting to them, and obviously, in the third case as well. But that's, I think, it's the number one job. It's creating the team that is going to be responsible for the company in the next stage.
During our last conversation, you said something that I thought was brilliant and really different, out of the box, that I hadn't heard before. You said something along the lines of building a company is actually not complicated. It's really simple.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly difficult. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think one of the most, or I don't know if it's most, but a very common bias that I see in organizations is the sophistication bias. Is that this perception that if it's not complicated, then it's not valuable. And so you see all these companies with implementing very complicated frameworks for many things. I mentioned strategic planning before. And I think it's a confusion between complex and difficult. There are many, many things in life that are not that complicated, but they are very, very difficult to do. And so anybody who wants to quit smoking or quit drinking or be fit and be healthy can tell you that there is not very complicated. Just stop drinking. Go sleep. Wake up in the morning. Go to the gym. Move. Run. Lift weights. It's not rocket science. But it's not easy to do because it requires discipline and dedication. And I do a lot of those things, and still today, things I enjoy a lot. I wake up at 5 a.m. in Seattle in January, and I don't want to leave home. I don't want to leave my warm bed. It requires a lot of commitment to do. A lot of things in companies are not that complicated. When you find somebody, when you see somebody that is failing, who's failing in a role, it's not very complicated. You sit down with that person and you say, look, this is not working out. We're not delivering, we're not performing, And yet we postpone, and we delay, and we don't do it. And we think we do it for them, but it's really we don't do it for us, because we don't want to go through the uncomfortable moment of telling somebody that we love, in some cases, that we appreciate, that we like working with, saying like, you're not doing your best job here. And we don't want to do it. It's like not waking up in the morning to go to the gym. It's like that. It's focusing on the customer. You know, it's taking 100 calls because your system is down. It's not very difficult. I mean, it's not very complex. But it's a pain in the ass to spend 2 days, I did it, apologizing and listening to all kinds of things that your customer will tell you because your system was down. We were down for a few times, and I had to do it. I spent like 3 days apologizing to hundreds of customers. Not very fun. I didn't want to do it. Those are hopefully a couple examples.
That was great.
Yeah, something I was also wondering about is many founders, when they start a startup, they're rigorously working on it, and they sometimes forget to take care of their own health, take care of themselves. And what do you have to say about work-life balance and how founders can balance that out?
Well, I don't believe in work-life balance. I think that's a very, I understand the term, and I understand why we say work-life balance as if it was two different things. I think there's only one life. There's a life, there's things you do with your life. And sometimes you work, sometimes you don't work. Sometimes you you read and you sleep and you eat and do other things. You know, in certain stages of your life, work takes different proportion of your life. But I believe that we need to live in a balanced life, not just balance between one thing and the other. I place a strong value on my relationships, my wife, my family, and yes, there were moments that I was not present and I wasn't there. But you know, when I was there, I tried to be there, not try to be on the table and answering emails or slacking with us. Sometimes, you know, shit happens and somebody calls you and there's a problem on the other side of the world. And yes, it's 11 p.m. in Seattle, but it's 7 a.m. in Australia or somewhere. And that happens, exceptions happen. But for me, it's very important I think it's achievable, that you can look at your mind, your intellect, your body, and your soul as the three things, roughly three things that makes us. And you have to take care of all those at the same time. If you want to be really a high performer on everything. And again, it's not very complicated. If you ask any professional athlete, they take care of all of those things, not just training training their bodies.
Absolutely. Do we have any audience questions? I'll ask one more. Samir?
Hi, Junior, it's a pleasure to speak to you, and it's refreshing some of the way in which you talk about startups. After 4 startups, I know that everybody ends up forming their own view about what work-life balance is, when you apply it, when you do not, and at different stages you put it out. But my question is more to do with if you had to do Auth0 all over again, based on the lesson learned, or based on the things that work and did not work, what would you do differently?
Yes, I get this question a lot. Is this working or not? Is it working?
Yeah, you have to be called in the top part, basically.
Okay, maybe here. So I get this question a lot. What would you do with your life, not just with Auth0, with everything? What would you tell your 15-year-old, your 21-year-old, your first startup that failed self? And I hesitate with that question a little bit because it's a little bit of an unfair question. Or not unfair, but...
Trick question.
Well, I understand the purpose, but what are the lessons, what did you learn in this journey? I guess that's the intent behind it. The reason I don't think much about my previous self is because, first of all, I cannot do anything about it. It's an intellectual exercise. But I cannot be 21 again, I cannot go and start at zero again in the same situation, in the same conditions. We forget that everything we do is a little bit unique in time, in a context. Nothing replicates itself. So even if I went back and I told that person all of those things, who knows if it would work or not. But first of all, I don't really spend a lot of time on anything that I don't have any control on. Going back to the past, for now, it's impossible. So, there's that. But the second thing is that there's a lot of mistakes that I made in my life. Tons. Believe me, I'm old. So I made a lot of mistakes. I broke relationships, and there's a lot of things that I don't like of myself in that past. So in the intellectual exercise, I would love to go back and fix all those things, but I know I can't. At the same time, those same mistakes and in some cases, like embarrassing things that I did. Thankfully, there was no Facebook at that time to capture any pictures or any of that. But in a way, all those things kind of shaped me who I am today. So it's a little bit like, what if I go back and I give all this advice to myself, and then I don't end up being myself again, today. And I kind of like who I am now. Despite all those shameful things, and take it with a grain of salt. I didn't do anything bad, or didn't kill anybody. So I was a good person, but I was an inexperienced person. And so I made mistakes that I wouldn't do today. But those mistakes are the ones that today keep me in check. Because every time I look and say, oh, I'm going to get angry, as an example, I know that anger is weakness. And anger doesn't give you anything. Anger is one of these very, what's the term? Very corrosive fuel. You feel that in that moment, you feel that you're like moving things forward, only to find out very quickly that it destroyed everything in that process. So now I still get angry, and I still feel all the things that I feel because I'm the same person. But now I know better because I know myself. And I stop and I don't do it. So if I didn't do that, because believe me, a lot of people told me, don't get angry. And guess what happened when I was 18? I didn't pay attention to them because I knew better. So, I learned to kind of embrace all the difficulties and mistakes and errors and things that happened, and I am grateful to them because they made me.
It's great way to appreciate it.
I love the advice of knowing yourself. I mean, I just thought knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. How does one actually cultivate that self-awareness and know themselves? I do feel like some people are just blinded, right? They're sort of stuck in their mental model. But how do you encourage people to be sort of self-aware, objective, to know themselves? Any advice? Some people do meditation, some people do ayahuasca. There's so many things to bring to
Well, if it works for you to do all those things and get to a point where you understand yourself and your biases and your fears and what motivates you and what doesn't motivate you, go for it. For me, that don't work. And I cannot meditate. I can do it for 10 seconds and then
No,
I...
I was going to Argentina.
No,
We're in Chile for that.
but you know, I think I just some people are very spiritual and religious. That's not me. That doesn't work for me. I read a lot. I read old books because, you know, I find that books that survive, you know, a few hundred years are likely to capture the same durable, unmovable wisdom that truly works.
What are some of the books that you would recommend that you feel that we should read?
There is one little book that I would recommend, but I actually would recommend a newer version. The author is called William Irving, and it's called How to Live a Good Life, or something along those lines. So search for it, you will find it. It's a very old book that it wasn't even written by this person. It's called the Manual. And if you search for the manual, you'll find it.
Yeah, hi. How do you pronounce your last name? It's just Pace.
Pace would be here.
Okay.
Pace would be in Italy.
Okay, excellent. By the way, I'm a huge fan of Auth0. Thank you so much for your time today. My question is, you mentioned that after Microsoft, you headed down to Argentina to start growing.
No, I started the company here.
Here, okay.
Yeah, so that was one of the written clauses on my wife's contract. We are not moving anywhere else. Our life is here. Our kids go to school here. So we're not moving anywhere.
Where are you originally from then?
I'm from Argentina.
From Argentina, okay.
Yes.
I heard Argentina. Was there anything from your culture or your background coming from Argentina that is... well, I think
Yes,
that's my question.
definitely. Definitely.
Like, I'd love to get to know you a little bit more and your background and your history, from Argentina. What made you Argentinian here, starting a startup? I know it was... Tell us some secrets.
The immigrant grit.
Argentina is one of the most, was at that time, I don't know today, but at that time, I grew up in the 70s in Argentina. Argentina in the 70s was a military dictatorship. So I grew up, doing things that I cannot even imagine my kids doing when I was my age. My life was very good, don't take me wrong. I wasn't I didn't experience loss but I grew up, surrounded. I tell you a story. The neighborhood where I lived was all closed by soldiers. Because people lived there that were, generals or colonels or something. And so they was all couldn't go in that area. But I was 10, 12, and I had a bike, and I went everywhere with my bike. And so the soldiers that were preventing anybody from old cars to go in there, they didn't stop me. And it was awesome because there were no cars. So I could just go around, and it was a playground for me. And every once in a while there were people shooting at each other, bombs everywhere. And my neighbor, a block away from my house was blown out because somebody did something and blew up. All the windows in my house blew as well. My family and I were all under a table. That was the scariest thing that happened at that time, to me personally. But then a soldier would give me money and say, "Hey, go and buy cigarettes for me." So I was 12 years old, buying cigarettes in a store for a soldier that couldn't leave the place. Stuff like that, it was a very violent environment. It was an environment with a lot of violence. And even though you didn't participate in that directly, you could feel it around you. That was in the 80s, 70s, early 80s. There was a war with England, the Falklands War. It didn't last very long. Thankfully, I was 13 when that happened. My grandmother, who was Italian, she was crying because she had the trauma of the Second World War, and she believed that all of us were going to war, because wars last years. This lasted 60 days, so it wasn't terrible. It was terrible, but not the same terrible. And then just a very hostile place. You know, everything is difficult. Everything is really tough. So one skill that you learn there is to figure it out, make it work. You know, like problem solving is like a permanent thing in that environment. You go and get a bus, the bus doesn't work. Oh shit, how do I get to school? Well, oh, there's a train. Oh, it's a mile away. You walk, a mile, you get there. The trains are like packed with people. You get in the train anyway, sometimes hanging, and things like that are crazy now. For me, are like crazy stuff. But if there's one skill that I learned, is to figure it out. Problem solve. If you stop at the first no, if you stop at the first thing that prevents you from moving to where you want to go, there is a little bit like survival. In here, maybe not as much, but still. So that's a great skill that I applied. My parents were great. They raised us, shielding us from the worst of all of that. My parents are first generation, educated first generation. My grandfather was illiterate. He didn't know how to read or write. So you can see, that's what my grandfather. My parents knew how to read and write. They went to school. And there was this notion of, how do you make your next generation better? And they afforded us experiences of, I did everything at home. I painted, I changed, fixed things, and that gave me a lot of perspective.
So I want to follow up just with the next generation better part.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that intimate part of your life. I really appreciate that. You can see a lot of folks are younger here, and I'm probably gray hair age. But what would you say? What's the hope of the future that you can make it better with AI for the future of your? You have kids.
I do.
Okay. What
I
would
have
you
two
say?
boys.
Well, what are we going to do?
Probably your age, some of your age.
Yeah. So what's the future? What are we going to
I'm very excited about the future, actually. Because I think, first of all, I know that every wave of technology and disruptive technology like AI, it's scary. It was scary, at least for some people, when, we were used to having a mainframe, and now everybody has its own computer, and oh my God, there's no control, no compliance, and the world is coming to an end because of that. I witnessed many of these waves. The mainframe era, the mini computer, internet, later cloud computing, mobile computing, and now AI. And so like everything, there's going to be exaggeration, and there's going to be a lot of value too. I'm excited because now imagine having like couple scenarios, but I'm a big believer in education as the great equalizer. So more than anything else, I think education is one of those things that gives opportunities. And now we live in a world where there's no excuse to not learn, really. You can learn anything, any topic, in any language, really, it's amazing. So imagine a world where you can pack the expertise, the patience, the empathy of our best teachers and put it in a system that now can be given to every single child in the world, where they have a dedicated teacher for them that knows their weaknesses and what are the things they need more support on. So, personal tutor for every child on the planet. It's not that crazy that that's going to happen. Or the best doctors. You know, like somebody in the middle of nowhere in South America, a child living in the middle of the jungle there could have access to the best doctor, the best teacher that exists, that will exist. So I think the opportunities are huge, and I think one of you mentioned, yes, there's going to be disruption and some jobs will be to redefined. In the same way, there's no more, VTAM network specialists anymore. There's some, but that's a mainframe networking system. Nobody knows what that is anymore. Nobody uses that as much anymore. But the world needs more. And even for software development, I think you mentioned software development as being one of the industries with the most impact with AI. Well, I think what we miss is the fact that there's not enough software developers, even with AI, to satisfy the demand for great software. Because I don't know you, but do you love your experience booking flights or paying, making payments? It's awful. It's still pretty bad. So we need more software, not less software. And somebody, yes, sure, a lot of the stuff is going to be built automatically, but somebody else needs to imagine things or validate those things. In the same way, we have senior developers helping junior developers. So I think the demand is so big that we forget that the pie is becoming bigger. It's not that we need to divide the pie that exists today.
We got one last question from Clive.
You're probably one of the few people in the world that has really thought about identity and authentication. And probably one. So,
at one point in time, yes. Now, not anymore.
given that, at least my personal belief is I do believe that people will build software that takes actions on behalf of people for micro interactions for the future. What is your thoughts on all these protocols that are coming up? MCP, A2A, Stripe's new protocol. I know for original authentication, we started with REST. We added authentication headers, then we added OAuth. I'm sure there's SAML, and probably tons more that you know about. What does it look like going forward?
You should clarify that. I am retired. So I am not doing much in that space. I don't know the new protocols anymore. And I was the CEO of a company for a few years where, yes, I can code, and yes, I can pretend to be a developer, but not a professional one anymore. So I think some of the principles are still all valid. Because, in a world where we have entities doing work on our behalf, that actually exists in the physical world too. We give power of attorneys, documents, so other people can act as if it was us with a scope. We can say, I'm going to give you power of attorney so you can sign this type of documents, but not all these other documents. I'm going to give you power of health so you can make decisions, health decisions, if I cannot make those decisions. So those concepts exist even in the analog world. And so if I end up being surrounded by hundreds of agents doing things for me, one that is doing my holidays, another one that is doing my well-being and booking yoga classes or whatever. It's not very different from giving power of something to each of those agents. and doing those, those entities acting on my behalf and accessing APIs, and the principles exist already. There's you mentioned Auth. Auth0 is an authorization framework, not an authentication framework. And it's an authorization framework because it was born out of the need of providing third-party applications to have access to your data. So, would you allow Google to have access to, or somebody else to have access to your Google Calendar? That's Auth behind the scenes. So I think a lot of those things transfer, and perhaps, yes, we can do tweaks over that in the same way there's tweaks on HTTP, but all this works on HTTP, and it's not going to go anywhere. Yeah, there's going to be optimizations and protocols to make it faster, but some of the principles will continue to exist. One of the reasons I was very bullish on authentication, it's a pretty kind of foundational problem. It's like compute. You need compute, you need networking, you need storage. There's all kinds of storage, all kinds of networking. And authentication kind of falls into that category of things that will always be needed. So we will always need to know what is interacting with what and in what conditions. And so I like the problem because it was a kind of a universal problem. So I don't know the new protocols to have a strong opinion, but I think we have already a pretty good foundation.
We'll take a quick final one from Neil.
All right, cool. I just want to say, Auth0 is a really great platform, and thank you so much for making this happen. My app, Find It AI, also uses Auth0 actually.
Thank you for the business. Are you paying? Are you paying? There's a free version too, so it's okay.
But yes,
hopefully one day you will be a big company and you will be able to pay us.
Yes, of course. But yeah, I was curious, how did you get your earliest customers when nobody really knew what Auth0 was?
Chatbot.
Twitter, Stack Overflow. At the time, Stack Overflow was we looked at what you need to remember is that the hypothesis behind Auth0 was not really new. I mean, it's authentication. It's been around forever. My mom used to work with a mainframe. She had me, so we met many, many years, and she had a username and a password, okay? So the problem is a very old problem. What was unique and new was the twist on providing authentication so it was easy for developers to do, right? In the same way, Sentry did it for emails, or Twilio did it for SMS or voice. Stripe did it for payments. We said, that was my first tagline. We are Twilio for authentication, or Stripe for authentication, depending on who we talk to. And that's what we did. So what we did is we say, where are the developers? There's millions of developers in the world, depending on who you. And remember, I used to work with Visual Studio, so I knew quite a bit about the developer segment of our market. I knew that developers don't necessarily like a button on the website that says, call sales. No developer will call sales in the first interaction with your software. So we put ourselves in the shoes of, because we were all developers, so I'm a developer too. What is it that I do when I'm trying to explore technology? I just want to go, sign up, and try it out on my own. I don't want to read any documents. I don't want to see any videos. I just want to go to the dashboard and start clicking and testing and breaking things and trying to make something work as quickly as possible. So we optimized all the experiences so that happened. But then I knew that when something doesn't work, Or when you say, well, okay, this looks cool, it's great, it works. I want to know more. I want to read the documentation, and it better be good. So when I go to the documentation needs to be flawless. And I wrote 2 books about identity. So I put all the knowledge in the documentation. And so when our people evaluating our system went there, they got a lesson on identity and access management. And they read and they learned, and we made it a really pleasant experience. So everything flowed very naturally. And there's a point in time where a developer that is working not on a side project on a weekend, but in a bank on Monday, they want to say, well, they can tell their boss, I can spend the next 3 months building this on my own, or you can just buy Auth0. But you need to call sales. So there is a button somewhere there that says, if you want to talk to us, you can call us, but you don't have to. You can use our stuff, you can read the docs, you can download Quick Start, you can do whatever. And so we kind of figure out that flow of experiences. Evaluation, excitement, success, problem solving, purchasing. And people sometimes have the perception that our company was like PLG. I'm not sure if that term is used anymore, but product-led growth companies. It is bottoms up. We did that, but we have a pretty big, large enterprise sales team too, which is a pain in the ass to build, very difficult to build. And we had BDRs and SDRs and sales engineers and all of that stuff, because no developer will pay you $1 million, ever. Well, maybe now, that they're making more, but you need sales. So we kind of did that, but we spent a lot of time finding where developers were. There was Twitter, Hacker News, Stack Overflow, all the usual suspects. And then there was a lot of this grassroots discovery. Why are you building your own authentication? That's a waste of time. It's, that's not the problem that you're trying to solve. And very, very early on today, I mentioned timing and luck. We were lucky, 5 years before I started the company, I was telling big, large Microsoft customers, saying like, well, there's going to be a day where you will not own your hardware. The hardware will be in Microsoft's data centers, and your identity will be in somewhere else. And many of them will tell me, I will never put my credentials in the cloud or somewhere else that I don't control. And I told them, never is a very long time, so you might want to reconsider. Today, we don't even think about it.
That's a quick question.
Super quick.
Yeah. So,
My answers are all long, as you can tell. So
the
the problem is not the question.
I mean, you mentioned you're retired. You look too young, retired. What are your personal passion projects right now that you're spending most time on? And how can we be helpful?
Well, I am retired, but the retirement for me is pretty busy, actually. I'm not building a company. I'm not doing that anymore. I did it once, and it worked, and I'm done. I mentioned before my family, so I was present to some extent, but I was also absent. And I have 2 boys. We have 2 boys that they're young, and they're now young adults, and they're entering adulthood, and I want to be around for them. And my parents are on the other extreme. They're aging, and their life, it's taking them to the last few years. And I also want to be present, because I lived 10,000 miles away from them for 20 plus years. And so I want to be around for them. So a big chunk of my time now, it's there. If you want to babysit, at 86-year-old, which I will require a lot of dedication. No, I wouldn't put you
You
there.
just signed up.
I like Argentina. I want to get
Yes. But I mentioned, we've been fortunate, and I mentioned education. I didn't mention this, but our family focus is now on 3 things. We're very grateful to life because we had a really good life, and we were able to do a lot professionally. And, that's another myth, perhaps, of entrepreneurs, this word self-made man, which I really dislike, because none of us are here on our own. We have parents, we have teachers, we have managers and classmates, people that were there when we were not, when we were making mistakes, and they forgave us, or they gave us a break, or they gave us guidance. So we're here because of those individuals. So now it's my time for returning that. That's one of the reasons I'm here. I don't have to be here, but I have to be here. Because there's a lot of you, and hopefully will learn something from me, and maybe will not make the mistakes, or will get curious about the book that I recommended, and learn something about it. And potentially I will be one of those individuals in your lives that have shaped your future self in a small way. But, that my conscience will be clear that I did my part. A small part, but a part. We do 3 things: education, conservation, because we live in one planet for now, and we have to take care of it, and inclusion. We have members of our family with disabilities that are not particularly included in our world, and we are trying to fix that, or do our part to fix it. And so that's what we do. If you're really, really interested in things you can do, those causes, I'm happy to give you pointers.